So when looking at our client's brows, the first thing we want to realize is what type of hair that she has. Our model here has coarse hair, so something we want to be wary as well is how long we're going to process her. Each product has a different processing time, so if you have finer hair, go a little bit less, thicker hair will go a little bit more. So you're going to want to start with applying your first product. A pea-size amount is perfect, and we're going to start to brush through the brows. So breaking the brow hairs up, start to push them up, and then we will start to coat our first product into the brow. We want to make sure the back of the brow and the front of the brow are fully coated. So once your brows are fully coated, the next step is going to be saran wrapping them. The reason being is it's going to hold in our heat and allow us to process a little bit quicker. While your client is processing under step 1, it's important to remember that throughout the perming process, to brush throughout the brows, keeping them up and fluffy and more pliable into the desired position. It's also important to remember to put a generous amount of product. If you under-process the brows, not only will they not last, but some may curl. Once you're done processing from step 1, we'll remove the saran wrap. And you're gonna take all the product off, make sure you're not leaving anything behind with a dry cotton round. Don't use anything that's gonna be wet or have water, it will deactivate the perm. Now, if you notice our client's brows have turned a little bit warmer, it's completely normal. The color will lift and then we'll retint at the end to get it back to the desired color. So if you notice in the brows, there's a couple that are curling. We'll want to go through and reapply and re-straighten those brows up, just so that way they're a little bit more pliable when we set it in the position that we'd like it. Now, since we're reprocessing the brows, we'll only want to process for a shorter amount of time, 2 to 3 minutes, and then checking again on the brows. So once our client is done processing, we'll remove the saran wrap and clean with a dry cotton round. Notice all those hairs are pulled straight up. Now moving on to the second step, again, a pea size for each brow. And this is going to help set it in the position that we want it. So we're going to want to pull up and then moon over. I'm just taking a little dental spoolie and making the shape that we are wanting to fill her brows. Looking for areas that are empty where we can adjust the brow to fill in that space. Same as the first step, making sure that back is coated as well, pulling it down. And then back up. The second step is a neutralizer, so essentially stops the perming process and will solidify where the hair is, the shape that you want to put it in, and make it much more flexible for when your client is styling their brows at home. Once you've applied the second step, you will also cover this in saran wrap for the set amount of processing time that's listed on your product. With the second step, you're just going to brush through the brow. This second step is going to be that neutralizer, so more of a creamy texture. It repairs the keratin chain, which means a longer lasting brow shape. So you want to make sure that you're brushing it in the shape that you want the brow to be set in. It conditions and softens the hair and has a smooth, silky appearance after it's done. You'll be covering that with saran wrap. I like to kind of place it a little bit closer on the edges, make sure it's all pushed down on the edges. When the brows are done processing, after about 10 to 15 minutes, you'll take the saran wrap off, grab your cotton round, and then pull that product off. It's very important to make sure you get all the product off of the brow and using a clean cotton round each time. After I've removed the neutralizer, I brush through the brows to put them into place to get them ready to tint and shape. After you're finished brushing through the brow, you're going to take your tint, starting at the front of the brow and working to the back. I just kind of throw it all on there and then you'll clean up afterwards. You want to make sure that you're putting on the tint as fast as possible because since you've already stripped the hair from the perming process, it does tint much quicker. I noticed for especially blondes, the first 30 seconds, and they can pull very quickly. So you want to put the tint on there and pull it off as a test strip as well, just to see the first time if it's your first time with that client. I also brush through the brows with the spoolie with the tint to make sure it's fully coated on both sides. Our client here likes her brows very dark, so we'll just brush through and wait for a couple more seconds. And once the color looks like it's done, we'll be pulling that off. You want to make sure that you're pulling all of the tint off because if you leave anything on there, it will still tint and it will pull very dark. Especially for your fairer hairs, you want to make sure that you're pulling that off and making sure it's nice and clean. After you're done cleaning the area and brushing through the brows, you're going to throw your conditioner on. This is a really important step. You want to encourage your clients to keep it on for about 24 hours. And the only aftercare rule really is no wet for 24 hours. So ensure them not to do a shower, wash their face, or anything like that. I always tell them that they can actually take a face towel and clean around their face and just avoid the brow area. Now that you've applied the conditioner, we're going to actually brush through with a dental stick. I like these because they're a finer tooth comb and they get all the individual hairs. My technique is to brush directly up and then start to moon it outwards when you move to the arch of the brow and all the way down. Once we have those fully brushed up, we're going to go through and just trim. I like to use a tinkler because it doesn't pull the hair follicle out. Something that's important to notice is at the front of the brow, you want to make sure that each line and thickness is the same throughout. So hers at the front is actually thicker than it is at the arch of the brow. So traditionally you would trim it. She likes her brows very fluffy, so we will leave it. But generally I look at that bottom line on the brow, trim it upwards with that tinkler, and then I go about the same thickness as what her arch would be, and I trim it right at the front. So just making sure that everything is nice and lined up, that both of those lines are the same thickness at the top. So you can see kind of here at the front where I'm trimming at the front, I want to make sure that that skin is nice and taut. So you're going to pull with your thumb and your pointer finger up and stretch the skin. If you don't have the skin stretch, you can snag your client's skin and cut them. So it's very important to make sure that your skin is taut. Going right on the edge of that tail, I just lightly trim, and then I'll go through and replace the brows before I trim the top. After you're done trimming your brows, you're going to go through and fill in your brows. I like to use a little bit of powder. The reason being is because that conditioner is more like a petroleum jelly type base. So that powder will actually stick better and hold a lot of color. It's pretty hard to get a light brown, so if you are doing somebody that's a blonde, make sure you have a lighter hand. Then I like a flat brush just like this because I can get a crisp edge. And I just kind of go in and make sure I'm laying that powder in just to get a color base, and I can always clean up right after. After I've got the color down, I'm just going to go ahead and clean up the brow. I like to wipe it off on a water wipe because then you get a clean slate each time and it won't spread any darker colors. And you can just use your little spoolie there to push down any hairs to make sure that that line is nice and crisp along the edges. I always like to go through and at the end clean around at the arch of the brow and make sure that line is nice and crisp before I throw any concealer in that area. So I'm done, I'll go through with a flat concealer brush and just a little bit of a light concealer to patch any areas up, and it always looks really great to highlight the area as well. It shows your client as well what their brows could look like if they filled them in, and it's always encouraging after the tint because it shows them what they didn't have before. I always like to lightly conceal any red areas on the skin, so if you do notice that your client has a blemish, I do like to kind of conceal that with a disposable spoolie. So I just put a little bit of product on there. Once I'm done with that, I'll just go make sure that my brow is set in the place and use the back of that tinkler and sharpen up my edges along the tail and the front of the brow.